Thank you. And thank you, Corbin, for that very nice and kind introduction. And I want to thank Bilal for inviting me to participate in today's events here at Williams College. Good morning, everybody. Is everybody awake? Because I got up pretty early to drive here from the South Shore of Massachusetts and went through a whole series of different weather, from very warm to very cold here, from torrential downpours to hail and ice and sunshine. So it's been a nice trip this morning and an interesting one at that. But it's a real pleasure to be here with you today to celebrate your 2013 Claiming Williams events. But before I begin, I want to acknowledge two key experts that are with me today, and I hope they'll participate later when we do our Q&A, and I hope you'll have some questions for them as well. But my colleague, Assistant United States Attorney Kevin O'Regan, who works in our Springfield branch office, and Supervisory Special Agent Cynthia Deedle, who is a real expert in public corruption in the civil rights arena. She's done civil rights cases all throughout the country, so I hope you take advantage of her knowledge later on and have a question or two for her. And I'm thrilled that they are with me today, as well as another law enforcement FBI Special Agent Mark Karangigas, who oversees the western part of Massachusetts. You know, the catalyzing force behind Claiming Williams Day, and the reason that I understand we've gathered here together, is to address some very grave issues which have sadly affected this community. I think it's important to remember that academic institutions are a microcosm of society. They're not, despite our best efforts, free from prejudice or above the moral deficiencies of society. But they are a place where the call for reform is received with great fervor. So my hope for the time that we have together is to engage in a dynamic dialogue about civil rights, questions you may have regarding its enforcement throughout the country or here in Massachusetts. That's why I brought a couple of experts here with me, and also to air issues that you may have about civil rights or hate crimes, to air these that sometimes get ignored or people tend to think that they don't exist at all. Let me first start, though, because I was asked to do this, just to share a little bit about myself and how I arrived at the position that I am in today, so you can understand a little bit better of why I feel so vested in these issues and why I am personally committed to ensuring that Massachusetts is a safe place to live for people of all walks of life, all different backgrounds and beliefs, so that they can live free from threats or intimidation. You know, as United States Attorney, I am the Chief Federal Law Enforcement Officer. I oversee 3 offices, our main office is in Boston, and the focus of the office is to investigate and prosecute violations of federal criminal law, and we also represent the government. We represent the government when it is sued by others, and there are cases against the government. That's part of our responsibility. But we also sue on behalf of the government in the civil arena. When people have violated, for example, the American with Disabilities Act, people have discriminated in the area of employment or housing or Fair Lending Act. So that's just a little bit of some of the work that we do in the office. I have to say that before I became the United States Attorney, I worked as an assistant U.S. Attorney in the office for over 12 years in the Economic Crimes Unit, which I think was an excellent role to prepare me for the responsibilities that I have now. There, as an assistant in the Economic Crimes Unit, I handled a whole variety of different complex financial crimes, and I witnessed firsthand the devastating impact that those kind of crimes can have on individuals, on families, and on businesses, and even communities. But then in 2009, I got the opportunity to become U.S. Attorney when the president was newly elected, Barack Obama, and then there'd be a changeover. The president selects all 94 U.S. attorneys around the country and in Puerto Rico, as well as Guam and the Virgin Islands. And I decided to apply. I had to go through a selection process, but I was very fortunate that even though initially I thought I didn't have a shot at it, you know, here I am standing before you. I have to say that, you know, throughout the process, I continued to do my work until I was sitting at my desk one day and I got a call from the late Senator Kennedy to tell me that I was going to be his and Senator Kerry's choice for U.S. Attorney of Massachusetts, and that they were going to nominate me for the job. Of course, that's if I was still interested in the job. What do you think? You know, and even though I knew that the road would be long for confirmation because I'd have to go through the White House and Department of Justice vetting process, I knew that I was well on my way to achieving a dream of a lifetime. And, you know, I was sworn in November of 2009, and I work alongside the most talented investigators and prosecutors in law enforcement. And I have to say that the road that I've traveled to get here has not always been so easy. Now, while many different factors have propelled me into this position of being the first woman and the first Hispanic United States attorney, those facts are not lost on me. I'm very proud of that. I think it's a source of strength and encouragement for me, and I hope for others as well who want to sort of break through the glass ceiling, so to speak. I was fortunate to have parents that instilled in me values and confidence from a young age, and so I saw the fact that I was a Hispanic woman of modest circumstances, not as a hurdle, but rather as an opportunity to excel, to break down barriers, and hopefully to make a difference. I'm the oldest of 5 children, to parents that moved to New York City from Puerto Rico, and my first language was Spanish. My parents didn't speak English when they raised me, and they were 2 folks of very, very little education. They didn't even have a high school degree. But they instilled in me what I'm sure many of your parents have instilled in you, which is that through hard work and a real commitment to education, you can do anything that you set out to do. You can accomplish your dreams. Now, as I reflect upon my professional experiences and accomplishments, I'm reminded, you know, of when I graduated from law school. How did I know what the future would hold for me? And I have to say I've been very, very fortunate professionally. I've had the opportunity to be a state prosecutor in the Middlesex DA's office. I was a federal trial attorney starting out at the Justice Department through the honors program. As Corbin mentioned, I worked at Harvard for about 3 years working on the Harvard Guatemala Criminal Justice Program, where I had the opportunity to work with members of the judiciary, prosecutors, defense attorneys, other legal professionals to try to implement criminal justice reforms in Guatemala. And I also did a stint in private practice. I worked at a small firm doing civil litigation and criminal defense work. And I have to say, especially as a criminal defense attorney, I found it a very fulfilling experience being able to help people who had gotten themselves into trouble and really needed someone to help them and their families navigate the criminal justice system. People who had made mistakes, made the wrong choices, and on 2 occasions, people who have been wrongfully accused of crimes. And so that was a tremendously rewarding experience for me. And just as rewarding, and perhaps more so to a greater extent, has been my career as a prosecutor. I've been primarily a prosecutor, both state and federal. And I have found that as a prosecutor, I've had the opportunity to advocate on behalf of victims who have suffered a terrible tragedy, and to help them and their families navigate the criminal justice system, but also to be in a position to make sure that defendants' rights are properly observed and protected as well. So I have to say that all of these experiences professionally have really prepared me for the job that I have at hand. And I have to say that, you know, as I said at my swearing in, there are certain obstacles that you come along the way. And I think one of them, I spoke to one of your students, I don't know if she's here. Is Betsy here? Betsy, nice. Huh? Becky. Oh, Becky, I'm sorry. Becky, I know I called you Betsy on the phone a couple of times, so I apologize for that. Becky. Becky interviewed me this morning for an article that she was writing, and she was asking me about adversity and handling, how did I deal with certain things. And I said to her that, sometimes people have certain perceptions, certain stereotypes that they adhere to when they see a woman, when they see a Hispanic, when they see an African American, a Muslim, an Asian, anyone of a different background. You have these perceptions, these stereotypes. And what I told you is I've always felt it very important that, and I tell this to students all the time and lawyers when I speak to them about navigating their own careers, their own futures, that it's very important that you don't let stereotypes and people's perceptions limit where you can go and limit what you want to do or to define you. And I think that you have to always work really, really hard to overcome those stereotypes. And I think that that's something that I have always done by working hard, being true to myself, and I think knowing that at the end of the day, I'm not going to be judged by what they see, but more by what I've done and what I do. So my experiences as a woman and as a Latina and as a lawyer have endeared me with certain perspectives and motivated me to advocate on behalf of communities that are too often the subject of hate and ill will. So let me get our discussion started about civil rights. Civil rights are a top priority, not only for the United States Attorney's Office, but for the FBI as well, and throughout the Department of Justice. And we consider it essential to safeguard the most basic freedoms and liberties while fighting hate and extremism. Those of us in law enforcement, such as Agent Dietel, have a mutual obligation to protect the stability of future generations by remaining steadfast in our ongoing fight against hate and violence, all the while protecting our civil liberties. And that's a tall order and a delicate balance that we always strive to achieve. At its root, however, this isn't just about our laws. This is about who we are as a people. This is about how we value one another and whether we embrace our differences or allow them to divide us. It may be hard for many of us to fathom the actions which have taken place on this and other campuses around the country in years past, and it is hard for us to imagine the premeditated campaign which ignorantly targets certain individuals for the color of their skin or the faith in their hearts. But the different types of civil rights violations, and we're going to leave some information with you. There are packets that my office put together, really more specifically addressing different kind of civil rights violations, statutes that apply to different types of conduct to make it a bit more meaningful for you. But today I'm just in my talk, I'm just going to be very general, and then during the Q&A, if you want to be more specific, we certainly can do that, and I've got experts to help me answer your questions. But we focus a bit on the deprivation of rights under the color of law, that's use of excessive force by people in law enforcement and authority, hate crimes, which we're going to talk a little bit more about in a moment, interference with access to reproductive health services, and human trafficking, where you traffic individuals for use in sex or you're forcing their labor. Now, we investigate these cases. These are 4 top arenas that I had wanted to indicate to you, but there are other areas as well, and you'll see that information in the packet. Now, hate crimes includes all types of crimes where the offender is motivated by specific perceived characteristics of the victim, including the victim's race, ethnicity, religion, sexual orientation, transgender preference, and so those are some general basics that I'm highlighting to you. But even in the absence of action, sometimes there can be a crime. And I'm talking about, for example, threats, which are, from my understanding, have been a concern in this community. Now, a true threat is a serious communication of an intent to commit an act of unlawful violence against a particular individual or group of individuals. It doesn't include jokes, indelicate expressions of anger, or political hyperbole. And since 1990, Congress has passed several pieces of legislation to help shape the future of hate crime initiatives and preventative measures. Because, in some arenas, people may hear certain comments, certain words that are very offensive, disturbing, and there's freedom of speech, the First Amendment. But then there are other arenas where you have threats, intimidation that follow, and violence, and then you sort of lose that First Amendment protection, and then it borders into doing something that is can be against the law, either a civil law or a criminal law. Now today we're going to focus on the Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Hate Crimes Prevention Act, which I'm sure many of you are probably familiar with, at least in name. Matthew Shepard was a political science student at the University of Wyoming, and in 1998, Matthew was brutally tortured and left for dead in Laramie, Wyoming, by two men who had targeted him because of his sexual orientation. Matthew was gay. And following the beating, he was tied to a fence, and when they found him, he was unconscious, was in a coma and then kept alive on life support. And then he was pronounced dead 6 days later. I had the opportunity during one of our civil rights training programs to meet Matthew's mother, who speaks so movingly about her son, the challenges he faced, and really speaks not just to honor his memory, but to educate people so that people become more tolerant, become more acceptable of those that are different. James Byrd was an African American, and that's the reason he was murdered. On June 7th of 1998, he accepted a ride home from three men whom he was acquainted with, he knew, from around town. Instead of taking James home, the men took him to a remote country road and beat him before chaining him by his ankles to their pickup truck and dragging him for 3 miles. Although the autopsy suggests that James was alive for much of the dragging, he died a horrible death. 2 out of 3 of James' murderers were well-known white supremacists. With Shepard and Byrd representing the victims of violent crime in this country, President Obama signed the act into law in 2009. Now, the statute, and I'm going to do so generally, has 3 separate provisions, the first of which covers racial hate crimes. It is in legalese to willfully cause bodily injury or attempt to do so with a weapon because of race, color, religion, or national origin. And this means crime motivated by bias against certain groups identified in the statute. And these are the ones that can be federally prosecuted. But in addition to that, the statute expanded it to other groups as well. Because prior to that, it wasn't federally protected if you were gay. And so it covers you if the crime against you, and there has to be bodily injury or attempt to commit bodily injury with a weapon. It now covers those of sexual orientation, sexual preference, and transgender as well. And in that general sense. Now, as we know, oftentimes threatening speech precedes violent acts and understandably can seem very damaging. Although the Shepard-Byrd Act does not criminalize threatening speech, racially motivated speech, there are other hate crime statutes under which these threats can be prosecuted. And I know that in our office, I think a couple of years ago, we prosecuted someone who had sent these threatening letters, threatening that they were going to burn churches and burn NAACP, churches that were where the congregation was primarily African American, and NAACP offices sending letters, threatening letters they were going to burn those places, and we conducted an investigation. It was an FBI case, and we were able to prosecute that case. Even though it was threatening, even though it was letters, no physical harm, we were able to prosecute it pursuant to a different federal statute. So just because it doesn't fall under this particular Hate Crimes Act that was principally, enacted to deal with hate crimes, there are other federal statutes, which I said are in the packet, that we can take action on. Now, I want to give you an idea of how prolific hate crime is in the United States so you can understand why it has become a top priority for the Department of Justice. The Hate Crimes Statistics Program compiles data from hate crime reports that are submitted by law enforcement agencies and local law enforcement throughout the nation. And the numbers are staggering. And even though I say this and we have these numbers, I can tell you that there's still significant underreporting, because not all agencies, not all local law enforcement departments report this kind of information. And we are actually going to be take steps to try to have greater reporting done. But over 6,200 hate crimes were reported in 2011. And of the incidents reported, and keep in mind that many, as I said, go unreported, 47% were racially motivated. 21% resulted from sexual orientation bias, and 20% were motivated by religious bias. Now, as we look further at the motivation, you can see by the stats that the majority of reported hate crime is targeted against African American. Now, in looking deeper, you can see that people of many religions are also being targeted. There's also a very strong targeting of the gay community. Now, here we can see just how these hate crimes are being committed. Okay, this tells you where, look at 62%, over 62% were anti-Jewish, 13% anti-Islamic. So this tells you about what the focus has been in on sexual orientation, and it's broken down in that fashion. This slide tells you just what kind of crimes are being committed against these different select groups. And here you see that 29% were destruction, damage, and vandalism. Another 29% were intimidation, and 34% were assault, simple and aggravated. Now, since I've been doing all this talking thus far, and the goal was to have a little bit of a dialogue, I'd like to hear some of your thoughts on this based on what you've seen thus far. Do these kind of numbers surprise you? Oh, come on, we're at Williams College. There must be some thoughts going on in there. Yes?
I'm from New York, and I came from a high school where there was a very significant Jewish population. So I'm actually not used to being the minority. Jews are very much the minority in the U.S. and the world. And I think that from the numbers that we've seen so far, what is no surprise to you is that 62% of hate crimes that were religiously motivated were anti-Jewish. It's something that I wouldn't have expected, even knowing that Jews are significantly minority in the U.S. and the world.
Yeah. I was surprised by that too, because I grew up in the city. You'll find this interesting. I grew up in a housing project. Everyone I grew up around until I was 16 was primarily Latino, so I didn't know I was a minority until I got older. And then when I moved to Long Island, when I was 16, my family was able to move us to a little house in Long Island. And there, a lot of the people that I interacted with, and at the school that I went to, Adelphi University on Long Island, the majority or a significant population were Jewish. So I was surprised by that myself when I saw how high the numbers were. What are your thoughts? Anybody else? Yes.
So I'm originally from San Francisco, but I lived for a period of time in Louisiana. And based on my experiences there, I think there's a lot that happens that doesn't fall under this hate crime categorization. So I think there's a lot more that happens that isn't talked about, isn't reported on. Yeah, I don't know.
Okay. I think you're right. I think there's a lot of underreporting. There's underreporting in two basic ways. One is in law enforcement. Not all law enforcement reports what they investigate or or complaints that they look into. But I also think that individuals dealing with certain incidents are not reporting it. And that's one thing that I hope, when incidents occur, especially on a campus, which is one of the things I talked to Becky about, is that people should feel comfortable reporting certain incidents, certain conduct, and then the authorities should immediately respond to it so that they feel that, something that's occurred that's serious, and especially in the beginning, if you don't know how serious it is yet, it's being given attention to. Now, as I promised, I'll tell you a little bit about this case, which was handled out of our Springfield office, and Assistant U.S. Attorney Kevin O'Regan, who's here with us today, was the lead prosecutor on that case, along with our chief out in Springfield, Paul Smith. And this was a case which truly shocked, I think, from just going around when we've discussed it in different arenas, the citizens of Massachusetts, and it garnered national media attention. Just hours after Barack Obama was elected as the first African-American president of the United States, Michael Jakes, who's one of the defendants in this case, he burned down the newly constructed Macedonia Church of God in Christ, which had a predominantly African-American congregation, and the church had just been built. It wasn't even completely built yet. It was just almost finished, and it was burnt down because he and two other of his friends hated the thought that an African American was now going to be the president of the United States. And for this ruthless act, which they burnt the church completely down. Fortunately, no one was hurt. No, it was in the late night hours. But for this ruthless and illegal act, Jakes was convicted, and he was sentenced to 14 years in prison in order to pay $1.6 million in restitution. He committed it, as I said before, with two other men, Benjamin Haskell, who was sentenced to 9 years, and Thomas Gleason, who was sentenced to 4.5 years. Why Gleason such a low sentence? Because he cooperated with the government and testified at trial. Is that correct, Kevin? Thank you. Now, I think that these sentences certainly send a message that law enforcement in the state, local, state, and federal, take these cases very seriously. And this particular case highlighted the great investigative work that was done by the ATF, Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms Bureau, the FBI, the Massachusetts State Police, the Hampden County District Attorney's Office, and the Springfield Police Department. All of these law enforcement agencies worked closely together, hand in hand with prosecutors from our office in Springfield. Now, we have all been very active in fighting these kinds of crimes, but one of the best ways to fight crime, I think, is to prevent it from happening in the first place. The Department of Justice has been very active in engaging in the various constituencies that it serves to end hateful action and discrimination and to preserve civil rights for all. Since 9/11, the Arab American and Muslim American communities are often the target of such hate and discrimination. We have conducted various outreach efforts intended to align with core American values, such as civil liberties, diversity, and religious freedom. The Attorney General has personally held numerous meetings with Muslim American leaders to address hate crimes and hate incidents against Muslims and Arabs and Sikhs. Attorney General Holder has also attended interfaith services that bring together leaders from a wide variety of faiths to reaffirm a respect for each other's beliefs and practices. And I have to say that I myself have done so as well. It's really one of the best parts of my job. Because quite frankly, this is an arena that I was not as educated about Islam and Muslims and how they think and what they believe in, and really some of the fear that they have to deal with, not only for themselves when I meet with elder folks and parents, but really the fear that they have for their children and what may await and what paths they may take or can be threatened by. Now, my office, as I said, we've done some of these. And how do we address the issue? One of our partnerships that we have been engaged with, well, before I talk about the partnership, let me just say that shortly after I became U.S. Attorney, I instituted the Civil Rights Enforcement Team, which is headed by two of our more experienced prosecutors in the civil rights arena, one whose experience is in criminal cases and the other in civil matters. And so Sonia Rao and Ted Merritt head our civil rights enforcement team, and they work with 10 to 12 other lawyers from around different units in our office to handle civil rights cases that come into our office, both criminally and civilly. I have also assigned a victim witness advocate to that enforcement team, as well as a law enforcement coordinator that does all of our outreach coordinating. Now, one of the partnerships that we've been involved in, and this I will not take credit for because it was instituted just a year or two after 9/11 by our office, but I have expanded it and certainly trying to bring our Bridges efforts out to the western part of the state. And Bridges is this group that meets together on a monthly basis. It stands for Building Respect in Diverse Groups to Enhance Sensitivity. And it's a group that I enjoy meeting with. It started out with representatives from the Muslim, Arab, and Sikh communities, but more and more as the years have gone by and we expand our reach, we have participants from the Asian community, Latino community, African American community as well. And we're trying to also expand our efforts, as I said before, to the western part of the state. We meet monthly to discuss issues of concern, what's on their mind, what are they thinking about, what areas should we be paying attention to as law enforcement, and also to give them greater access to government officials participating in those meetings. In addition to community representatives, are people from my office, the FBI, state police, other federal agencies, representatives from TSA, from Customs and Border Patrol. So different arenas, Department of Justice representatives, our civil rights unit there. And so we all come together to not only listen to issue of concerns and figure out how to deal with certain problems that come up, but also to give them greater access to government officials. Sometimes many people don't report things because they're afraid. They're not just only afraid in terms of repercussions against the people who may have committed an act against them, but they're afraid of the government. They don't know really who is the government. What does it consist of? Who really is going to listen to my complaint and do anything about it? And who do I even go to in terms of, do I go to the local police department? Do I go to the FBI? Do I report it to the state police? And so we meet on a monthly basis to air out concerns and also to really institute a dialogue to give people greater access to government. Now, I think that one of the things that I will say, when I say, I've participated in different meetings, forums, events, training sessions, interfaith service, not only do I do that because I want these various communities to learn more about the U.S. Attorney's Office and what we do and how we can help, but also so that I, as the leader at the U.S. Attorney's Office, I learn more. I educate myself. I have a better understanding, and that's important not only just for me, but the people who work with me, who want to do significant work in this arena. Now, there's no room for crimes that are motivated by hate towards someone's race or ethnicity, religion, sexual preference, or how they dress or want to dress. And it's my belief that the nation derives strength from the diversity of its population and from its commitment to equal opportunity for all. We are at our best when we draw on the talents of all different members of our society, and our greatest accomplishments are achieved when diverse perspectives are brought to bear to overcome our greatest challenges. So I think it's wonderful what you try to do today in terms of learning more about different backgrounds, different individuals, different arenas, and how to improve things so that everyone feels free to express their views and express who they are. Questions? Thank you.
Why the Shepherd and Bird Act only prosecutes crime that's been committed with weapons and not assault? Because what Matthew Shepherd attacked? I don't know.
No, I said bodily injury. When a hate crime is motivated, by a bias towards a particular group, in Matthew's case, because he was gay, and bodily injury occurs, which it did. When you beat someone, or you hit them, there's bodily injury. In his case, he died from the injuries. Or when there's attempt at a bodily injury but use a weapon. If I go after you with a punch, but I don't hit you and I don't hurt you, that isn't covered by the statute. Did I get it all right? Because she's the real expert on this.
I think you are, ma'am. But the other part of this, and I'll go ahead and say it.
Please, no?
Is politics. So when the Matthew Shepherd law was passed, I'm a geek, I know these things. It was tacked on to the end of a defense bill in 2009. It would not have passed both chambers of the House if it was just a standalone bill that was trying to be a law. Because it was stuck on the back of something that was going to get passed, it became law. Senator Kennedy had tried, I think, for 14 years to get it through Congress, and every year sometimes it would pass in the Senate and it would always fail in the House, but unfortunately it passed after he passed away, which was sad. But there was a lot of give and take as to what the Shepherd law was going to cover, and the biggest part of it obviously was sexual orientation, which thankfully that did obviously make it into law, but there was some politics behind why it didn't cover certain things.
Yes.
So in your presentation, you gave us the definition of what a hate crime is and some examples of what a hate crime is not. Can you talk more about the gray area or complications that arise when you investigate alleged hate crimes? Because I don't imagine it to be so black and white all the time.
Cynthia, you want to answer that? Because she's investigated hate crime, civil rights violations all throughout, but in hate crimes in particular.
Thank you. I think I'll actually turn it over to you with the
Kevin,
Macedonia
too, yeah.
Church case also. A lot of it is common sense. If there is an alleged assault between a perpetrator and a victim and the police are called because they're fighting, a standard question that any of you would ask if you arrived on the scene is, what's going on? What happened? He hit me. Why did he hit you? And that's really the sticky point is the victim going to say, hey, he used a lot of racial slurs, or he used gay slurs. He hit me because I'm gay, or he hit me because because I'm a Sikh. That's usually the onus is on the victim to say that. A lot of victims are not going to report that they were attacked because of their sexual orientation or because they're transgender, because they're afraid, they're embarrassed, their parents don't know. There's a lot of issues why victims don't report. But even if the victim doesn't report and the subject says, I was trying to steal his iPhone, that's the only reason, no other reason I want the iPhone, we can still look at the circumstances surrounding the incident. Did somebody else hear you say something? Did the fight start in the bar and there was some chatter in the bar as to why the fight was going to begin? And if it progresses beyond that in an investigation, we look at a lot of the background of the subject. So I'm sure it's not going to surprise you. We're going to look at his Facebook site. We're going to look at his Twitter account. We're going to talk to his college friends or his high school friends who may say he's the most diverse individual we know. He would never have committed a crime based on racial motivation or based on sexual orientation or something else. Or we might get, he is the biggest white supremacist on campus. The way he dresses, what is the pictures he posts on Facebook, the literature that he carries around in his backpack every day that he leaves, in the student union or whatever. So if it progresses to that point, it's not hard to really find out a lot about somebody's background. But again, we want to look at the moment that the crime allegedly occurred and what was said or what was done. And that, that happened in the Macedonia case too, as to, okay, the church burned down, and now some people are being looked at for maybe committing the crime, but why?
Maybe
Address
Kevin, you
that.
can talk a little bit about that and how it became clear as the steps you took. When did you know that this was a hate crime? This was motivated by hatred towards the president, as opposed to just an act of vandalism, horrible vandalism.
Well, the night that the fire took place, it was just a few hours after Barack Obama had spoken to the nation. If you remember the TV pictures from that park in Chicago, it was really an incredibly dramatic moment as we all watched the first African-American president or president-elect address the nation. And this fire of this African-American church took place 2 or 3 hours later. So that standing alone was significant circumstantial evidence that this was racially motivated. I mean, how likely was it that a church was going to be burned down just a few hours after Barack Obama spoke, and that it would be a black church? So we had very strong suspicion right from the beginning. And then the two things we had to figure out, and it was in large part due to the FBI and the people that they worked with, we had to figure out was who did it and why. And those are very difficult things to do because there's no real evidence left behind a conflagration like the one that U.S. Attorney Ortiz showed you on the map. Eventually they were able to figure out who did it, and then it was, could we prove at a trial that it was racially motivated? And what we ultimately learned was that these were very ignorant, very racist individuals who, and now I'm going to use the racial epithets because they became so common in the trial that we had. They would use the word nigger, and it was phrased like it was water. They would tell nigger jokes the way that any of us tell jokes to our friends every day. They referred to the president as the nigger president, that wasn't worthy of their respect. And we were able to determine, of course, that they then became angry when President Obama was elected, and that they were going to take retribution by burning down the nearby black church. If they had just stayed with their telling of the jokes and the racial slurs that they told, and they taught a dog they had to attack African Americans when they were directed to by others. If they had just stayed with the words, which are protected by the First Amendment, we wouldn't have had a crime and we wouldn't have been able to prosecute them. But when they converted the racial animus into action by burning down the church, that's when we had the federal crime. One last thing about the racial animus part. If we were to ask, actually I did ask the guy who cooperated, Thomas Gleason, about the things I just mentioned. He would say, if he were sitting here now, I'm not a racist. He would use the phrase, some of my friends are black. And their families would say, they're not racist, what are you talking about? In fact, Jake's mother testified at the trial, my son's not a racist at all, even though they harbored these kinds of opinions and used these sorts of racial slurs. So what that told me was that identifying our own biases is incredibly important. And being able to have self-awareness and recognizing our own biases is very, very important. And I actually looked at myself and said, okay, well, what about you? And I realized there are things that I was biased about, things that I was uncomfortable with. For example, I was uncomfortable with Muslims. I just didn't get it. I didn't know anybody who was Muslim. And through Carmen's Bridges program, I wound up being a part of that and meeting quite a few Muslims, including Muhammad in the back and Bilal and some others, and began to, just like by becoming familiar, by coming to know the thing that I didn't know, I began to realize what wonderful people they were, and my bias, my uncomfortability kind of fell away. The defendants we prosecuted in the Jakes case, they weren't self-aware at all, and they didn't really have the ability to say, okay, I'm going to get to know these people and let my prejudice die.
Yes, sir?
I was wondering, just talking about all these hate crimes, and it sounds like you're dealing with this on a fairly regular basis. Do you ever, or maybe not, but it does come up. Do you ever worry for your own safety about like retribution, anything like that? I mean, especially as the person that's seen as a whole this post. I was just curious how you deal with that.
I don't essentially worry about it, but I'm conscious of it. Not so much as a Latina or a woman, but more by nature of the job that I hold. And I think that, this is a very, very difficult job, and not just as United States Attorney, but when I was an assistant, I'm sure Kevin deals with this as well, as an assistant United States Attorney, we have a tough job. And I think sometimes we have to take certain action that some people don't like, don't approve of, find is not appropriate, and angers and upsets people. And so you have to be aware of that. But I feel very confident. I mean, I'm very fortunate when any threats are directed at us as federal prosecutors, we're very encouraged, and we don't take it lightly anymore, to report it. And so we work closely with the Marshal Service that will provide us with security or in certain locations. I feel pretty good that the FBI is here with me today.
That's the only reason I'm sitting up here.
Yeah. Yes?
I have a question about the perceived threat topic that you touched on earlier, and how you sort of define what a perceived threat, if it's serious or not. At least the issues that we've been able to deal with on campus have been written out on a wall mainly, and then there's never a way to identify who it was who did it or what their intentions were in writing it. And so one of the things that you listed is it doesn't count as a perceived threat if it's a joke. Or any of these other qualities. How do you deal with not knowing what the motivation behind writing a threat or placing a threat is, and determining whether or not it's a perceived threat that should be taken seriously?
That is a fantastic question. So I receive, I don't even know how many civil rights complaints on a daily, weekly basis, and I discuss them with members of Ms. Ortiz's CRET team to answer that question every single day. So there's a perceived threat that we are made aware of, whether it is scrawled. I think the latest one a couple of days ago was at the Boston College Law School. There was some disgusting things that was drawn there. Is that a threat to somebody? Graffiti is a big one. So graffiti, something is drawn on a building or a structure of some sort that somebody perceives as threatening. I may look at that and say that's not a threat. You may look at that and say, I'm Jewish, that's a swastika, I feel threatened, that was directed at me. It's a question of, okay, you take a look at what you have. So you have, the easiest one is there's a swastika on a synagogue. Is that a threat? Probably. You didn't draw it on a Catholic church, you drew it on the synagogue. The circumstance surrounding where the graffiti is found is a big clue for us. The other part is, if it seems benign to me because a swastika that's drawn on a college dorm room door, okay, that might not be an issue for me, except the two women that occupy that dorm room are both Jewish. Okay, well, they probably could perceive that to be a threat. Do we have a human victim is the biggest question. Is there somebody who says, I feel threatened by what was drawn, by an email, by what was said to me, by a letter I received, by a graffiti? Is there a human being that feels threatened? That's probably the biggest clue that we look for. And the other thing is, and this, it's the legalese part of it is difficult. So what is the serious communication of an intent to do harm? What is that? That's something that we try to figure out every day. Is it serious? Okay, is it a joke? If you're the guy that drew it and you say, I drew it, it's so funny, look how funny that is, it was a joke. Okay, really, is it a joke? Or, what was your best? So were you drunk the night before? What were you saying in the bar the night before you did it? It's a whole circumstance surrounding everything. So you take that one piece of graffiti, that one email, that one Facebook posting, and then you dig into it. Is there a victim? Who did it? Can we figure out why he did it? And every case is going to be different. But I can tell you that there is not, there are no complaints that are called in or emailed or written to the FBI, to the U.S. Attorney's Office, that are ignored. They're all going to be looked at because chances are there is somebody who feels threatened by what was written, and we want to protect that person.
And I just want to add in terms of, the severity of that threat, or what one person perceives as a threat, or a community perceives as a threat, you look to see how it develops as well, in terms of determining the intent. So if somebody did it while they were drunk, and maybe they had a beef with the person, and there's other factors to it, then maybe that lessens it. If there's follow-up conduct, all of a sudden there's other conduct associated with, that's another situation. So I think that's, it's like you continue to look at it. Another investigative tool that we use in terms of determining, and I don't remember the specifics of another case, and I don't know if we used it in the arson case, Kevin, is search warrants in terms of determining someone's history, pattern of thinking. If we believe that they're in possession of materials, if we think that they're a white supremacist, and they believe that they need to take certain actions against certain groups, usually they have materials, and so we use search warrants to try to get more and more information during the investigative phase.
Yeah, I have a question about a specific example that Kevin brought up when you said that if somebody was training his dog to assault people of a different race, how that couldn't be prosecuted as a racially motivated crime. But doesn't that demonstrate that there's some serious attempt at
As soon as I said it, I thought, there's a little bit of a glitch, and some future law student's going to jump on it and ask me a question about it. The reason that we focused on that was not so much was the direction of the dog, which, by the way, was named Nigger, would say, so that they would say to him, Nigger attack, and it would be to an African American. We focused on that not so much as, is that separately a crime, but is it evidence of their racial bias, of their racism? And the fact that they would call the dog Nigger and train the dog to attack African Americans was, in our view, strong evidence of their racism. Now, whether or not an individual incident of that would be a hate crime or not is a separate question, and it would really depend on the individual circumstances of it. They tended to do it not to harm another person, but to be fun, well, in their minds, to be funny and to sort of insult the other person.
But let me just explain, I would think that if they trained the dog to do that, and say they're at a mall or on a street, and an African American person was walking by, and they asked, and they triggered the dog to go after that person, and the person was hurt, I would think that we would be able to prosecute it. I don't think that you could just say it was funny in terms of, as long as you could show the pattern of behavior, the intent, because in essence, that dog is a dangerous weapon. When you train it to do that, the way you use it, I remember this from my prosecutor 101 days, that, a pen, you take a pen and you stab somebody in the eye with it, yeah, that's an assault and battery by means of a dangerous weapon, the pen, because of the way that you used that particular object. And if you use a dog in that fashion, I think we'd have a good argument to make that, it would be a hate crime.
I was wondering, in the case that you mentioned and any other cases, are they prosecuted more harshly because it's a hate crime or specifically because it's a hate crime? Like, if there was an arson case in a church that was not motivated by race, just specifically because they didn't like the pastor or something like that, is it prosecuted more harshly?
There are enhancements. Why don't you, there was a particular enhancement I know here that applied. I think there were certain statutes that add penalties if the crime is the result of a racially motivated individual.
What's the justification for that? Because how do you take two actions that result in the same harm, the same effect, and say that one's worse than others?
First, I want to say that these sorts of things are not, you can't surgically look at every prosecutorial decision and say, well, how does it compare to this or that? It's the totality of the circumstances in each case. If a church were burned down without racial motivation, let's say it was just animus towards the pastor, that would be what we'd call a garden variety arson, unless there was a religion component to it. So you have to figure out exactly where the bias is. In our case, we had that it was racially motivated and that they used fire. So the component that added to the penalty was the fact that they attacked the church for out of racism, and that in fact they used fire, and that elevated the penalties significantly.
Are you asking why a particular bias-motivated crime would be prosecuted more heavily than I don't
Yes.
like your blue and red? So, I love that. Nobody ever asks that anymore. Again, that's a great question. The best answer that I can come up with is, as a society, we have deemed certain crimes that are motivated by certain problematic issues, race, religion, national origin, sexual orientation, gender identity, that if it's motivated based on one of those factors, that is more heinous than being motivated by, I don't like your hair, I don't like your shirt. One of the reasons I believe that has survived as an element of criminal statutes in local, state, federal jurisprudence is pretty much as a deterrent factor, and as this is how we want to represent ourselves as members of the United States, in this country, in the society, how we craft our government and our way of living, is that we want to prosecute certain crimes more heavily than others to try to detract and hopefully lessen the amount of crimes that are committed based on that factor. But that's great. That's like a First Amendment question, you know, why should it be? I mean, if I hit you because I hate your shirt, you know, why is that prosecuted more leniently than I hate you because you're Caucasian? That's a great question.
I also think it's because we as a society pride ourselves in, you know, this is the United States of America, all embracive, all inclusive. I think that's the goal. And I think that a hate crime, it has such an impact on the group that is being attacked. You know, if the church gets burned down because you know, someone hates the pastor because he doesn't like, you know, his sermons, or, you know, then people go, oh my goodness, the church burned down, you know, and, you know, the pastor's got an enemy. When the church gets burned down because the congregation is African American, that affects an entire community, an entire group that thinks, my God, I cannot express my religious views. We cannot come together because there are people who hate us simply because of the color of our skin. And so I think that has a greater impact on a bigger group of people, and I think that's another justification or a factor for more enhanced penalties, depending upon how egregious the conduct is. Yes, way back there.
What are your options for handling hate crime-like events that deal with groups that aren't specifically covered by the statute? For example, you know, attacked because you're a redhead, or because you wear glasses, or because you're a Republican, or something like that. It's where you have this same sort of classification of it's a group-oriented thing, and it affects the whole member of the group in terms of instilling fear, but it doesn't actually fall under the specifics of that statute. What are your options for handling those kinds of cases, and do you deal with those?
I think we would just handle them in terms of, you know, how egregious was the conduct, the impact to the victims, but you don't take that protected class into account, because that's what the Constitution provides for. There's certain groups of individuals or certain bases, you know, people who have been discriminated against for the religion that they practice, for who they want to marry, what the color of their skin is, what ethnic background they are. Those are protected types of groupings as opposed to, the group that wears glasses. And so as a result, depending upon what the crime was, it wouldn't be a hate crime, but it would be a crime against this group of individuals that suffered what, depending upon what the crime is. And so I think you would handle it in that respect.
I think it's also going to be interesting to see what would be the next protected class that would emerge. So the protected class that has emerged in probably the last, 20 or 30 years is the GLBT community that now has worked so hard to pass even legislation under state legislatures, now under federal criminal civil rights laws. But I always wonder, who's next? I mean, is it going to be the class of redheads? Is it going to be, I'm being flippant, but, what's going to be the next class that will emerge? And I have, just so you know, I have had complaints that I was beaten up because I was Republican. I'm not going to comment on those, but, but I have had those. Yes, you.
We're going to take the last one.
So I was wondering, based off the U.S. definition of hate crimes, it seems to me that a lot of primary and secondary school bullying, especially when it turns violent, I know a lot of it is like racially or sexual orientation motivated, could fall under this umbrella of hate crimes, severely underreported though they may be. I was wondering if it's hate crimes that are carried out or directed towards minors, does that change how you deal with it? Does that constitute a large portion of the cases that you look at? Yeah, just things like that.
What I would, and I will leave it to them too, but we do have cases of bullying that do come to our attention. And you're right, it's usually GLBT students that are picked on, and a lot of it too is the Arab, Muslim, and Sikh students that are picked on. So it's usually those two classes that I see, more prevalent, I think, than the other protected classes. And we do try to get involved in those. We are sometimes under civil rights umbrella arena. Sometimes the FBI is the investigative agency of last resort. So a lot of times if a complaint like that is called in by a parent, the first questions I'm going to ask is, did you report it to the teacher in the school, and the school system and the school administration? Are they aware of it? I'm not going to jump into a history class and start getting into he said, she said, and who hit who if the school wasn't notified, if the district attorney wasn't notified, if that local police department wasn't notified. So I'd like other people be notified as well as the FBI to see if something could be handled on a more localized basis. I mean, really, do you want FBI agents coming to a 10-year-old's home to talk to him about? That may be warranted in certain circumstances, but probably not in every circumstance would you want the FBI crawling into your living room. So we try to sometimes where it's that type of crime, and not that that's not serious, because of course it is. I don't want my son to be picked on, but we try to see if somebody else can maybe handle it first, more efficiently, and maybe more acutely dealing with those two students, both the subject and the perpetrator, or the victim, knowing that these kids are probably going to be together and in the school system for a long time. Is there a better way to resolve this than FBI agents coming in? I don't know if you wanted to say something.
Okay, so we thank the U.S. Attorney General, Carmen Ortiz,